Welcome to Medium with a Mic. I'm Kari, a psychic medium, empath, death doula, among other things. I'm glad you're here with me today. Let me ask you this. What if the single most powerful tool ever used to control human behavior was built on a mistranslation? What if the word hell, that fiery, terrifying place of eternal punishment that has kept billions of people afraid of God, afraid of death, and afraid of themselves, what if that word simply meant dead? What if it meant asleep? Because that's what the evidence shows. And today we're going to look at that evidence together. We're going to trace the word hell back to its original languages, examine who the devil actually was in ancient scripture, and ask the question that I think is the most important one of all. What if most of what we call evil is actually just fear that we've misread, mislabeled, and handed power to that it was never meant to have? I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm here to show you what the scholars say, what the research suggests, and what I personally believe after years of working in this field as a psychic medium and intuitive empath have shown. And what you do with that is entirely up to you. But I promise you this, by the end of the episode, you will never hear the word hell the same way again. Let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the original languages. The Old Testament was written primarily in Hebrew. The New Testament was written in Greek. And when those texts were translated into Latin and then into English, something happened. Words that had very specific, very earthly meanings got transformed into something much more dramatic, much more terrifying, much more useful as a tool of control. Let's look at the 4 words that became hell in our modern Bible translations. Sheol. This is the Hebrew word used in the Old Testament 65 times. 65. And what does Sheol mean? It means the grave. It means the pit. It means the place of the dead. In ancient Hebrew understanding, Sheol was simply where everyone went when they died, where the body goes. The righteous and the unrighteous alike. It was not a place of punishment. It was not a place of fire. It was a place of stillness, of sleep, of waiting. The Hebrew people didn't have a concept of eternal torment. They had a concept of death as rest, as sleep, as a return to the earth. When you read passages in the Old Testament that reference Sheol and see the word hell in your English Bible, what you're actually reading is the word grave or death or sleep. Hades, this is the Greek equivalent used in the New Testament, and Hades in Greek mythology and in early Greek understanding was simply the unseen realm, the realm of the dead, not a place of punishment, not a lake of fire, just the place where bodies went after death. In fact, in Greek mythology, both the good and the wicked went to Hades. There was no separation into reward and punishment based on this word alone. Gehenna, now this one's fascinating, and this is where the fiery imagery comes from. But the origin is not supernatural at all. Gehenna was a real place, a literal physical valley just outside the walls of Jerusalem. Its full name was the Valley of Hinnom, or Gehenna in Hebrew, which became Gehenna. And this valley had a dark history. In ancient times, it was a place where some Israelites practiced child sacrifice to pagan gods, a practice that was deeply condemned. Later, it became the city's garbage dump, a place where refuge was burned continuously, where the fires never quite went out. When Jesus used the word Gehenna, he was using a reference his listeners would have immediately understood, a real, local, disgusting place of burning waste. He was using it as a metaphor, a vivid, culturally relevant image, not a description of the literal afterlife. And yet, somehow, that garbage dump outside Jerusalem became the template for eternal damnation. Tartarus, used only once in the entire New Testament in 2 Peter, and referring specifically to a place where certain fallen angels were held. Not humans, not souls, angels. One reference, one very specific context, and yet it got folded into the broader concept of hell as well. So here's what we have: four completely different words from two different languages with four different meanings, all translated into the single English word hell. And then Dante wrote a poem in 1320 called The Inferno, describing 9 circles of hell in vivid, terrifying detail. And that poem, that work of literary fiction, became the visual template for what billions of people believe hell looks like. Not scripture, a poem. Let that sink in. If you listened to our last episode about the crossing over process, you already know my answer to this. Death is a shedding, a homecoming, a return to source. There is no fiery punishment waiting. There is no eternal torment. There is a life review where you feel every ripple you created. But that's not punishment. That's understanding. The original Hebrew and Greek understanding of death was actually much closer to what I witness in my work as a death doula than what modern religion is taught. Rest, sleep, a return to the earth and to source, a waiting place that holds no terror. Fear of hell has been one of the most powerful control mechanisms in human history. When you can make people afraid of eternal punishment, you can control their behavior, their loyalty, their money, their votes. You can keep them coming back. You can keep them compliant. I'm not saying everyone who taught hell did so with malicious intent. Many believed it sincerely. But the foundation that belief was built on, the translation that made it possible, that foundation is shaky at best and dishonest at worst. If hell is a mistranslation, what about the devil? What about Lucifer? What about Satan? Let's start with the name Lucifer. It appears exactly once in the King James Bible, in Isaiah 14:12. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? Here's what most people don't know. The word Lucifer is not Hebrew, it's Latin. It comes from the Latin words lux, meaning light, and fer, meaning to carry or to bear. Lucifer means light bearer or morning star. The original Hebrew word in the passage was Hillel, meaning shining one or son of the dawn. And biblical scholars widely agree that this passage in Isaiah was written as a taunt against the king of Babylon. a human king, drunk on his own power, being compared to a star that had fallen from the sky. It was a political metaphor, a poetic insult directed at a mortal ruler. It was not a description of a supernatural fallen angel. That interpretation, Lucifer as a fallen angel cast out of heaven, developed gradually over centuries, pieced together from multiple passages in different books, written in different eras for different audiences with different purposes. It became the story we know today through layers of interpretation, traditions, and again, poetry and art. In the Old Testament, the word used is ha Satan. In Hebrew, the ha at the beginning means the. So it's not a name, it's a title. The Satan, the adversary, the accuser. And in the Old Testament, how Satan functions almost like a prosecuting attorney in a divine courtroom. Look at the book of Job, one of the oldest books in the Bible. How Satan appears before God and essentially says, Job only loves you because you've blessed him. Take away those blessings and see what happens. And God allows it. How Satan operates with divine permission. He's not God's equal or opposite. He's more like a role within the system. That is a very different figure from the all powerful Prince of Darkness that popular culture and centuries of religious tradition have created. By the time we get to the New Testament, written in Greek, the word used is diabolos, which means accuser or slanderer, where we get the word devil. Again, an adversarial role, an opposing force. Not necessarily a supreme being of evil with his own kingdom and army. I do believe negative spirits exist, not as a theory, but as something I've encountered several times in my life. Evil spirits are real as evil humans, which is exactly what they are. They did not complete the crossing over process. We talked about that in the last episode. So they did not shed their nasty human traits, and they love scaring people because they were evil humans. They don't possess a physical body anymore. So we have every advantage over them. We are a lot more powerful, and I don't have any problem letting them know that. So do the same if you happen to encounter one. What I do believe deeply and completely is that the vast majority of what people label as evil, as demonic, or as satanic is actually something else entirely. So here's my theory, and I think it's backed up by everything I've witnessed in this work. We are afraid of what we don't understand. We are afraid of what we don't understand. We always have been. Fire, storms, disease, death, the dark. For most of human history, the things we couldn't explain became supernatural. They became evil. They became the devil's work. And that instinct to externalize our fear, to give it a face and a name and a story, that instinct is deeply human. But it's also deeply limiting because when you blame the devil for your struggles, you give away your power. When you see evil everywhere, you live in constant fear. And fear, as I've said before and will keep saying, fear does not exist on the other side. It is a human construct, a biological survival tool that we have widely over applied. The darkness in most dreams isn't demonic. The struggles in most lives aren't punishment. The difficult people in your world aren't agents of Satan. They're humans, wounded, afraid, acting from their own pain and trauma. They are following their path, the contract that they created before coming to this life's experience. So everything isn't sunshine and light. There is genuine suffering in this world. There are people who do terrible things. There is darkness that is real and that causes real harm. But the answer to that darkness is not more fear. It's not more demons or more hell. The answer is understanding, compassion, awareness, and the refusal to hand power to anything that only has the power you give it. There's a concept in psychology introduced by Carl Jung called the shadow self. The shadow is the part of you that you reject, suppress, and refuse to look at. The anger you pretend you don't feel. The jealousy you're ashamed of. The darkness you've decided isn't part of who you are. And here's the thing about the shadow: the more you deny it, the more power it has. The more you project it outward onto other people, circumstances, or supernatural forces, the more it controls you without your awareness. Jung believed that integrating the shadow, actually looking at your own darkness, acknowledging it, understanding it, was essential to psychological wholeness. And I believe it's essential to spiritual wholeness too. What if the devil, at least in part, is the externalized shadow of humanity? What if we created this figure, this all powerful adversary, because we couldn't bear to look at the darkness within ourselves? What if the real spiritual work isn't fighting an external enemy, but integrating an internal one? I'm not saying this is the complete answer. I'm saying it's worth sitting with. Hell was a mistranslation. The grave became a torture chamber, sleep became eternal fire, and billions of people have lived and died in fear of something that the original text never actually described. The devil is far more complicated and far less powerful than centuries of tradition have suggested. His name was a metaphor. His role was an adversarial function. Evil spirits do exist, but don't fear them. The fear of evil has caused more suffering than evil itself ever could. You were not created to be afraid. Your soul on the other side, in its truest form, knows no fear whatsoever. And you can begin to practice that here, in this life, by refusing to give power to the darkness. Look at what frightens you, name it, understand it, integrate it, because the light doesn't defeat the darkness by fighting it. Light and darkness go together like dance partners. And understanding that is not fear-based. It's as understanding the trees that cast shadows in the woods. If you enjoyed this episode, please help me grow with a like, a subscribe, comment, or share with a friend, and visit my website, sacredwhispers1111.com, to read about me. Sign up for a weekly email or go to my podcast page for the most recent episodes. If you'd like, you can even buy me a coffee to support this work on my podcast page. Thank you for joining me. Until next time, keep listening to those whispers of wisdom.